And the fundamental thing about CRO is that it is usually a separate thing to product or to engineering or to anything else. So historically, you'd always have a CRO team within a marketing department who were trying to kind of hack their way around the website, not having the ability to do anything to IT. Hello, Experiment Nation. Thank you very much for tuning in. Welcome to my talk. I'm talking to you today about how experimentation is an operating system. What I mean by that is I think the business world has ended up with the wrong idea of what experimentation is. It generally gets thought of as a tool, an experimentation piece of software, the techniques and capabilities that go with that. And actually, it's far more than that. It's a way of managing your business and your strategy and your innovation. Very, very quickly, I am Jonny Longden. I am the Chief Growth Officer of Speero. We are a dedicated experimentation and growth agency and consultancy. And we help clients with a range of things from actually doing experimentation for them through to management consulting, helping them scale and grow. I've been in experimentation since it was invented. I've been running A/B tests since around 2006. And I've been in various different agency and client side roles, including some senior product roles at places like Sky and Boohoo. So what does experimentation really mean? Now, everybody uses the word experimentation. Everyone believes they know what it means, but I think the way we use it has become a little bit confused. And when we say experimentation in business, it usually means one of three things. The first is A/B testing or CRO. And the fundamental thing about CRO is that it is usually a separate thing to product or to engineering or to anything else. So historically, you'd always have a CRO team within a marketing department who were trying to kind of hack their way around the website, not having the ability to do anything to IT. But that kind of persists, and CRO teams are generally in some way, shape or form separate, and they're doing their own thing, testing things, trying to make a difference. And the big problem there is why are we only testing some things? So when you look at it, really testing is about figuring out whether things work, whether they're a good idea. Why are you only doing that with front-end small user experience and not with other things? Why are like other product teams just doing things and just doing them without testing? The second is that in the product world particularly, A/B experimentation is seen as a way of checking that something doesn't break things before it goes live. So, you get big projects, big roadmap features that are just built, and then somebody will deploy it to 50% to check that it doesn't break things. But that is problematic when you think about it, because should you have built that thing in the first place? Sometimes not. And by the time someone's built something big, they're not really going to ever allow it to not work, because otherwise then they would have just wasted a load of time. So you'll generally find that people will find a way of it looking like it worked. The third way is in the same way that we say, I'm experimenting with a new shampoo for my hair or something like that. It's just like vaguely trying stuff. And this is really common at the moment with AI, where you've got businesses just kind of seeing what happens if they use ChatGPT for things. But where's the coordination? There isn't really any kind of system around it. It's just like, let's see what happens. And so these things are experiments, but not experimentation. So they're ways of describing specific types of experiments. And I'm going to talk to you about what I think experimentation really means. So let's think about something totally and utterly different.
My name is Ronald Santiago, founder of Experiment Nation. Our new book, Prove It or Lose It, the mostly no-nonsense guide to surviving experimentation program drama, is out now. Find it at experimentnation.com and all major bookstores today.
And the rest of this presentation is going to be using the analogy of the Apollo space mission. So the Apollo space mission is arguably the single greatest scientific and technological achievement of modern civilization, getting somebody to the moon and back. And if you think about that, the whole thing was experimental. So JFK said we need to get somebody to the moon and back within 10 years. And the program that was spun up around that was experimental in its entirety. They would have had to have sat down and gone, here's this goal and this vision. How do we do it? What are the different things that might be involved in that? We could catapult somebody to the moon. We could build a ladder. You test that. You test that. How are we going to breathe in space? You go and test that. What do we know about gravity? Do we know enough about gravity? Go and figure that out. And so the whole thing was a way of exploring the solution to this problem iteratively with evidence. And that is very different to when in modern business we go and say, do you do experimentation? And a business says, yes, I have an A/B testing tool. It's just a particular type of test. So this kind of way of looking at the whole program experimentally is what experimentation means. And I want to go through 4 key principles of that kind of experimentation. I'm going to go through 4 different principles of the success of the Apollo space mission that we might be able to learn from. Now, the first is what I call moonshot management. So how do you take something like a vision and a goal and a strategy and break it down into coordinated things that can be experimented on in a coordinated way where you can learn from it? So I mentioned this before, but JFK said this. It's arguably the greatest sort of example of a SMART goal. And the very first thing that would have had to have happened is some real critical thinking to figure out the different components of this. And that's really key. This is a simple statement, but there is an immense amount of complexity underneath how you would go about that. And that's what the first thing that we need to try and do to try and have any kind of notion of experimentation in a business. Now, how you would do that in a business is like this. So this is a real example of a retailer that I've worked with in the past. And they had a big problem of trying to appeal to a younger audience. So they've got this big problem, big theoretical question of how do we appeal to a younger audience? Now, that is not something that most people would think of as a starting point for testing. Most people wouldn't think, yeah, we can test that. But you absolutely can. You can break anything down and test things if you approach it in the right way. And to appeal to a younger audience, there are only 2 possible things you could do. One is fundamentally change the product, or change the way you market the product and the way you target people and speak to people. And in turn, those can be broken down further. So changing the product could be about merchandising products differently. So which products are you showing in marketing materials, shop window, anything like that? What are the products that you're known for from the way people see you from an outside point of view? Or you could have to actually fundamentally change the product itself, cut product lines out, create new product lines. If it's about marketing, the 2 things there are, one, you could restrict all of your advertising and marketing to addressable channels where you know you can target the right demographic. Would that work? Or it might be about changing the creative and tone of voice. And I'm not going to go through these experiments, but the really fundamental thing you might notice here is that these are not necessarily A/B tests. And that is the key thing. Experimentation does not have to mean A/B testing. The Apollo space mission, people were experimenting with and testing how to do certain things. And those things would not necessarily have been anything like a controlled experiment. It doesn't make it any less of an experiment. So some of these things could be pieces of analysis or investigations or whatever. The point is that really experimentation is about having kind of big questions and theories and creating feedback loops that allow you to learn whether those questions and theories, or whether those theories are right, whether your questions, what the answer to your questions are. And those don't have to be A/B tests. So anything that gets any kind of validation in a real kind of market context is a piece of feedback, is a piece of learning, a feedback loop. So how you go from these kind of big ideas to smaller, manageable tests is really key. The second principle is what I call mission control, so organization and systems. And this is absolutely critical. So the NASA mission contained within it over 400,000 people in different organizations, different businesses, whatever. And the coordination of those people is mind-boggling. Like in modern businesses, we're very siloed. We, sit in our own department. People don't speak to each other. And the success of the space mission was down to that coordination. Conversely, the failure of the European space program around that time was similarly down to a lack of coordination between different countries and organizations. And the way that you start to do that is through the idea of an operating system. So most people tend to think of any kind of experimentation as A/B testing software. And the typical mentality is we'll buy some software and get somebody who can use it, and that ticks the box of experimentation. But it really doesn't. And really the exactly with the space mission, the success of it is down to how you coordinate and organize what you're doing. And that, first of all, is how you take big ideas and map them into individual initiatives. But then how are you going to track those and keep track of them and prioritize them and all that kind of stuff? And so an operating system is, number one, the system and the software that you use to manage and track all those initiatives and ensure different people know what they're working on in a coordinated fashion. But it's also the ways of working and the rituals around it and things like that. So that is the key gel that brings together any kind of experimentation and allows you to have that sort of similar approach. The third idea is about, in the language of the space program, simulations and test flights, but ultimately it's about iterative learning. So, it's quite common in product environments to hear people, talk about testing something, and the answer be, well, it's just too big to test. Like it's, we've got to do back-end integration and there's dependencies and blah, blah, blah. So it's just too big to test. But that's a misunderstanding of the concept of testing. What people are thinking of when they talk like that are they're trying to conjure up an all singing, all dancing version of the idea and figure out how you would build that in order to A/B test it. But it misses the point, which is that you should be thinking about what is the very smallest thing you can do in order to demonstrate this idea. Now, this here is the first ever object of any kind that touched the moon, at least from the US side. So they didn't go, oh, this is all too big to test. We'll just have to build a massive rocket, put people in, and blast it off to the moon. They figured out, how to do iterative test flights, and this is the principle. So, whereas like most product teams will have big roadmaps, so big projects that are planned a year in advance, a much better way to do that is through what you might call a horse race approach, where every single idea, so you have tons of ideas, every single idea in a priority fashion is broken down into, first of all, the smallest possible thing that you can do, which might be a piece of analysis. If that looks like it's still valid, which a lot of the time it won't, then what kind of proof of concept can you do? And again, this doesn't need to be an A/B test. It could be a prototype with user tests. It could be like internal prototype testing, what you sometimes call dog food testing. And if that works, then you can go to say what's the rudimentary kind of A/B test that we can do, so on and so forth. The point is that this is a different way of looking at fundamentally product development, product management, and you're ultimately trying to reduce the effort and cost of development as you by only doing what really works as you learn that it's worth doing, that you get confident in doing it. The fourth principle, which I think is perhaps the most interesting, really, is around how you measure experiments. Again, not necessarily meaning A/B tests. And a lot of this comes down to the idea of systems engineering. So if you haven't heard of systems thinking, there are all sorts of books you can get on it. It's a fascinating area. But the success of, again, the Apollo mission was down to the systems approach, which ultimately is a way of looking at how all the different interconnecting parts of something relate to each other and interact with each other. And that is a very different way of looking at things to how we do things in business, which is to assign simple metrics, conversion rate, whatever. and to bring it to life a little bit. So in most business environments, teams, people are given KPIs, things to very simply look at in metrics. So you might be working to the idea that you need to increase revenue, and increasing revenue is sounds very simple. Why wouldn't you want to do that? So you get different initiatives and think, this one's going to increase the most revenue, this one's going to give us the most revenue, so we'll prioritize things that way. But this is a very, very short-sighted way of looking at things. And just as an example, here's what systems thinking looks like. So this is what's called a causal loop diagram, and it's very common to systems dynamics. And this blue circle at the bottom is showing a causal loop where really what happens first of all is that you're going to reduce the price. So in any kind of retail, in most kind of businesses, if you want to increase your revenue, reducing the price will work. It will. People don't want to pay for things, so reducing your price will increase revenue. Now, if you're not looking at profit or anything, you might be killing your profit. But if you're just looking at revenue, reducing your price will increase revenue because more people will buy. So you increase the revenue, and that tells you that was the right thing to do. And so you have a cyclical approach where you would continue to apply discounts. However, when you reduce your price, you will invariably damage in some way the brand perception. So people's perception of product comes from its price. You might really need to have people think that the product is good quality, and when you reduce the price, you reduce the perception of the quality, and that in turn reduces the loyalty and advocacy of the brand, and that in turn reduces repeat long-term sales. And all of that is invisible, really. You can't really see that happening, but it nevertheless will happen. And so you will potentially be having a much more weighty, detrimental impact on revenue, which is harder to see. And so, just thinking purely about metrics is very, very short-sighted way to look at things. And, if you just take something like conversion rate, it very simply, you can increase your conversion rate whilst decreasing your average order value, whilst decreasing profitability. It's very easy to do. So one of the problems here is that in the world of experimentation, experiments are seen as an autonomous decision. We run an experiment, measure it on conversion rate, and there's a binary: yes, do it, no, don't do it. And that the problem with that is that really experiments are not good enough in order to be able to make those decisions for us. They're one piece of a puzzle, one piece of information amongst others. And so what's far better is if we think, how do we instead make better decisions? We're making decisions anyway. If you run a test and you allow it to tell you what to do, you're making the decision. You're just doing it in the bad faith of thinking that the experiment is being data driven and telling you what to do. We're making the decision. So instead of thinking that experiments are decisions, we make the decisions, and experiments and other kinds of research as well help us understand what to do and help us understand how we might make a decision. And that might be taking the result of experiment along with appreciation of brand or customer experience or accessibility issues or things like that. So, whistle stop tour there, but hopefully that makes sense. Just to recap, experimentation, if you think about it, is a representation of how you do innovation and how a whole business can take its strategy and achieve that strategy through explorative means. And a business and the success of a business is no less a journey of exploration than something like the space mission. Winning in competitive markets is complex and difficult, and it's a journey of exploration. So, being able to win and do that means having strategies, testing strategies, figuring out what works. So these are some of the principles that might help you do that. Thank you very much.
My name is Romo Santiago, founder of Experiment Nation. Our new book, Prove It or Lose It, the mostly no-nonsense guide to surviving experimentation program drama, is out now. Find it at experimentation.com and all major bookstores today.